And now, Mr. Ted Greene, A Session with the Stars.
Hello, I'm Ted Greene, for those of you who don't know me, and thanks for coming today. I hope we'll have some fun. We're going to talk about jazz progressions and some related areas like chord substitution and comping, and walking bass, piano voicings, and a few other things that will keep you out of trouble. We'll get down to some basics first, discussing, let's talk about first adding color into chords. Like when we take basic progressions like A, D, E7, A, we're automatically going to be adding color tones, meaning like 7, 9, 11, things like that, into the progressions. Like this is an example of A, D, E7, A. That catches your interest more. I mean, you hear this, you keep walking by. If you hear somebody do that, you might be more excited about all these. That's A, D, E7, A. So we'll be covering that automatically as we go into all this stuff. And you'll see notes left out of chords quite often. We're going to be playing a lot of chords that don't have all the notes. So that's just standard stuff. We don't always include every tone in the chord. As far as which tones are left out, better learned by observation than a lot of rules, although it's not wrong to admit that the fifth and root are commonly some of the first to go. Let's talk about this chord substitution theory page. In case anybody doesn't understand the diagrams, the neck coincides, the strings coincide with these vertical lines, and the fret numbers given at the left, and the name of the chord, of course, is above each chord. And the basic chords that we're deriving our substitutes from are written right above the names of the chords. And those little slanted lines below are the how many beats we're giving to each chord, the hash marks, as they're called sometimes. Here's the first progression. It's based on that old thing. We're voicing it like this. Now, this feels a little stiff sometimes to always play on every beat, so I'm going to try and play it a little differently now, like that's what we call comping. We're still feeling that there are 4 beats. 2, 3, 4, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But what we're doing is we're punctuating. Comping is a style of rhythm that's a very punctuated style. You use only a few accents now and then. And it comes from the word accompany. They shortened the word accompany down to comp. It's like they do with names. Theodore, Ted, accompany, comp. And this is the same progression played with the half-step approach principle. It goes like this. I'll explain it in just one second. Like what's happening there is instead of going right to G7, we're going to go by way of the chord a half-step higher. This is what's commonly known as the half-step approach principle. See? We're using that A flat before the G. Then before the C, we've got the D flat 7. Now, we could have used a major 7, could have used a major 6. It doesn't really matter what kind of chord you use if you like the sound of it. It's just that it's a half step above. Could be below, too. You could go either way. I tend to favor the above thing more than the below, but according to taste. Let's look at number 2, section 2. That starts with the circle around the 2 there in line 2. We're going to take a different given progression, E minor 7 and D minor 7, and we're going to insert the half step in there first of all. Very simple. Now we're going to show a little active bass in there. You just kind of fool around in the bottom end. I mean, we could get real theoretical and say you're playing the 5th and all that kind of stuff, but I don't even think in those terms. I just trial and error it. If I'm holding a chord, I just look around for tones that I can reach and that sound halfway decent. You just move it around. It's a very simple concept. It's not the same as walking bass. We're going to be talking about that real soon. Let's look at line 3. We have the 5th approach concept now being inserted between E minor 7 and D minor 7. We're putting an A7 before the D minor 7. And We derive that because A is the fifth of D. You can approach a chord from a fifth instead of only by the half step, which we had done before. Let's look at both of them combined. This is still in line 3. The next example, we've got, put both of them in that time. We went, here's the same thing reversed. Oh no, I kind of reversed it already. Here's the other one. You can go, or we're just approaching D minor both ways, half step and by its 5. Here's line 4, and I'm going to play it stiff first, and this is adding a half step before the A7 now. Remember the A7 we just put in there before the D minor 7. Now we're adding a half step above it. Now we get, it's kind of stiff. Now I'm going to syncopate it a little. Now how am I getting the syncopation? Well, I keep the bass notes of the chords right on the beat, and I make sure that some of the chords are on the upbeat. For instance, right off the top. Here it is again. See, I'm breaking the chord up, the bass note and then the chord. Anticipation there. Here's the right hand, the bass and the chord. We get there a little sooner than we would normally. That's what anticipation means. But not the bass. I let the bass come a little later, right on the beat like it's supposed to. It keeps a drive going if the bass notes are all on the beat. Here we go. Keeps that drive. You feel that solid thing in the bass. Here's another kind of accent that's kind of fun. Quarter note triplets. Right where I'm tapping it, this is the beat. We're going to put 3 triplets into 2 beats. No, I can't tap it. I'll have to play it. The human element comes out, folks. Here it is. Now here it is with the bass note added. I recommend you learn it this way. First by itself, then with the bass, then fill in the missing note in the chord. Here's the E minor 7, however you want to hold it there. Here's the feel. Remember, it's bass on the beat. Takes a while. It took me a while to get that feel. Some people get it right away, but good luck. If you're one of them, great. Ghost notes, I'd like to mention that. Before, when I was doing that syncopated thing, I was going. Like a ghost note is simply playing a note that almost is indiscernible as to what its pitch is. You almost can't tell what you're playing, but so I just get it with I use the thumb and the middle finger for scale line. Some guys like the thumb and first. I have a short one, so I can't do that. But I get the upbeat kick, that ghost note with this finger, like that kind of sound. You'll notice me doing it along the way. That's what that's about, the ghost note. So, let's talk about using a portion of the quarter note triplet stuff. Like just instead of all through the progression, maybe just a fraction of it, like that kind of thing. That ba ba ba, it comes from the quarter note triplet. Because if you did the whole triplet, it'd be. Once your hand gets used to that feel of playing in that weird time feel, you can add just portions of it in. See? That's the whole thing. Okay, let's look at line 3. This is, line 5, but section 3. Line 5, section 3, we have a new basic progression, C, A minor, D minor, G, based on, and here's that same thing stiff. It's good to understand the difference between playing stiff and playing with feeling. And now here's the same thing with the half-step walking bass now. Not a half-step chord, but walking bass. Here's our bass line already. That's what we got. Now we're going to approach it by half-step, say, below each time. Little ghost note there. Now with the chords. I'm going to put the chords on the beat. It'll still feel stiff. Too stiff. Chords on the offbeat now. That feels better. But it's too obvious to do it every time, so we break it up. Quarter note triplet. leave out the quarter note triplets. Whole chord a half step. From above, adding other tones. You know, a lot of room there to fool around. Quality change is also indicated in this example. Quality change is real simple. Like, for instance, we could use A7 for A minor 7. We're changing the quality of the chord, what type of chord it is. And so in line 6, there are a bunch of examples showing how we take this and we change it to maybe, or both of them. And there's one other example there too. It'll be self-explanatory. And you can apply all that walking bass. I'm going to do this real slow, so you see me I'm hanging on to the A7 while I get that half step going towards the D7. We would have had that, but now I've got that half step bass coming up. So we get that kind of scene. Line 7 starts discussing the companion minor 7 and dominant 7 principle. That's a very useful concept, very useful concept. I think I was exposed to it first through Wes Montgomery's playing. He's one of my very all-time favorite musical heroes, as my friend Scott says. He's one of my heroes. Like if we have something like that, like the blues in B flat on one chord, what Wes does is he mixes in the minor 7, whose root is a 5th up. He might play. He's mixing in. This is like F minor and B flat, F minor, B flat, F minor. It's actually F minor 7 types and B flat 7. He just mixes them up a lot. The principle is any dominant 7 has a strong affinity to a minor 7 type whose root is a 5th higher, and vice versa. That principle works in reverse. And the chords can precede each other, replace each other, or be intertwined the way I was just doing. Like I say, Wes Montgomery, he was one of the champs at that style. And you'd be wise to listen to him and you'll hear it. There are a couple examples on line 7 that show that, but we don't need to play them. Line 8 and 9 will be self-explanatory if you read the accompanying notes that show you what chords are being substituted for and all that bit. That little line connecting the top notes of the last chords in line 8 is just a sustain mark, like a tie in musical notation. And I'm going to play the bottom line with the bass note on the offbeat. This is a different concept. Bass note on the end. 2, 3, 4. Kind of a fractured bass. Let's go to page 2. Here we have examples that show more notes in the chords, but they're based on the same principles that we had. Let's talk about arpeggiated right-hand styles. For instance, you might be in the studio and the producer says, look, I don't dig the groove you're laying down with all the solid stuff. And then you go, he says, no, I don't want any of that either. Can you give me something lighter? So you go. You just arpeggiate those chords. Break them up. Here's a different one. If you do that kind of stuff, you'll get hired back because you're more versatile than the guy that doesn't have his right hand thing. I'm just going right in order when I do that stuff, either right up the chord or right down the chord. So that's pretty easy to do once you work on it. You can practice that stuff in your car, you know, drumming around and all kinds of stuff. Okay, section 4, line 3, flat 5 substitution. This principle, this is a replacement concept. We're replacing chords with other chords whose roots are a flat 5th higher. There are theoretical reasons why it works, but it doesn't behoove us to go into that now because of the time it would take. It's more important to get used to the sound and play it. They won't hire you for knowing how it works. They'll hire you for knowing where to put it. You know, if you can explain why it works, you still won't get the gig if you don't know how it sounds and where to put it. Which brings up a good point. Where do you put any of this stuff? That has to do, as somebody asked me to mention that, I would say that there's a lot of trial and error that comes out of all that, and it's pretty important to ascertain whether you're in the context of being the guy who's playing all the chords or just along with the keyboard player, so you have to play second fiddle to him. if there's a guy playing piano, don't try and throw in all these principles, because you may get some dirty looks, to say the least. I would say if you're the only guy playing it, though, if you're just with a bass player, you can try all these things, and the bass player has to follow you, and his ears will sharpen up because of it. You might want to teach him the changes off the top. But anyway, in this line, we're replacing A minor 7 with E flat 7, as you'll notice. And G7 we're replacing with D flat 7. So here's the staccato. Here's the new guy. New kid on the block. Here's the next example. Yeah, that guy, I left that guy on my block. Oh, pretty good. Instead of, you know, that gets boring, right? You don't want to have to play that guy all the time. Okay, there, the next line has, this chord here is resolution from the G. This C13 sus chord here. It's just a resolution chord. It sounded pretty, so I added it in. Notice that the C chord has disappeared. This is the old Transylvanian art of chord disappearance. The C chord was included at the beginning of each progression, but now we suddenly be using E minor 7s and E7s. You should be able to figure out why we were able to kick that C chord out of there, if you go back and study it. And at the end of line 4, you're asked a little question, and you should answer that too. Okay, the rest of the page down to the last line talks about other, or it doesn't talk, it shows more or less some other applications of this flat fifth principle. Here's the same thing in a Latin field. The basic chords up there. And line 7 is a comp thing on the high strings. All that stuff there is able to be used over, or instead of, I should say, if you're running the harmonic show, if you're harmonizing a tune, or if you're just with a bass player backing a singer. Line 8 is pretty self-explanatory if you've studied these principles. Again, you'll have more time at home to really study these booklets. They're meant to include a lot of the information that I'm not able to verbalize right now. It's all in the booklet, I hope. Let's look at the last section on page 2. That has to do with bass line progressions. Sometimes we derive progressions from a bass line. And to be able to do this successfully, you must know about inversions. And that's a whole big study. I mean, two people could sit down and talk for 20 hours about inversions. There's just so much there. So I'm just going to scratch the surface here at best. You know, this is the bass line I'm playing. The given progression here is just a straight thing like that. Here's the bass line that the bottom notes of these chords are. Now what happens here is C, passing tone up to the inverted note for the inverted bass note. That's still a C chord up here. We're going to go then a passing bass note to get to A minor, inversion of A minor, passing bass note, inversion of F, another kind of F, and the G7 chord, which fell off the page. So that's what that sounds like. Okay, and the reason we're going over all these substitutions is because throughout the rest of the booklet are all these progressions which your understanding of them depends on a knowledge of these substitutions. So that's going to be the end of this little chord substitution section, and we'll take a little break now. I've been playing, I guess, about 22 years now. Yeah. Some of that very unseriously, but you know, the last part of it's pretty serious. Well, I was serious about blues for quite a while, but I didn't really pursue it seriously. I just sit and noodle, so I don't call that really serious. I mean, I played quite a few hours some days, but I wasn't really studying or learning, well, I was learning certain things, but I guess I got serious about 1970. I heard a lot of classical music in the home, and my mom used to play George Gershwin stuff on piano, which I apparently would just go nuts over, she said. And then my uncle played a lot of bebop for me as a kid. When I was about 3, he used to sit me down and play it, because apparently I took to it. I liked the sound of it, and he had a ball doing that. But none of that, I don't think it stayed at the time. It came out later. So the main music I remember really digging and listening a lot to, aside from Lucky Old Son by Frankie Lane when I was a real little kid, is early rock music. Chuck Berry and Elvis and Fats Domino and all those groups, the Platters and all that stuff, and then a little forward to the Drifters, and, you know, I mean, all through that whole, and then R&B music, a lot of that stuff. And any guy who could play guitar, man, electric guitar especially, anybody who could play that thing, I just loved it, because they were all better than me, doing stuff I didn't have any idea what any of them were doing. It was about 2 or 3 years before I started to play in bands, and we just played pretty crude stuff, 1-4-5 almost every tune, or 1-6-2-5, you know, the standard simple stuff. Okay, we're going to start on jazz progression number 1 now. Just basic progressions there. We're going to talk about pick style. Everybody have a pick? This is the basic strum of the thing we're doing. I'm doing it dampening style first because I want to make sure we're straight on the exact rhythm of it. Here's what the first 3 chords would sound like. This is a real rhythm style playing for when you're with a section, a rhythm section. This is not comping. This is, you know, laying down part of the groove itself.
A la Freddie Greene?
Yeah, a la Freddie Greene, thank you. Yeah. Okay, now here's the same thing with a little pulsation on 2 and 4, meaning a little drive forward, like... Get that feel. Sometimes it drives it a little more. There's the same thing quite a bit up more, like, let's try it about here, so you feel. Because you may have to play real up rhythm at times. Now, I'm almost overdoing that 2 and 4, but it's good to practice. Okay. Okie doke. Here's a common accent pattern. It's funny how the subconscious works. You know, I was trying to figure out some different accents to show you guys, and it threw up this thing that I realized was from a song I heard as a kid called Shake, Rattle, and Roll. This is the rhythm of it. It goes... So yeah. Kind of a trip. But it works in that style, too. It was the same thing using another kind of feel that came up out of a couple songs I knew. This is the rhythm first. It goes... I think the first time I actually heard that was in the Beatle tune, Getting Better. You guys probably all heard that tune somewhere. Okay, here's the same thing with an accent, an anticipation. Let's try that. Let me slow it down. Those anticipations come on the upbeat, so your pick's going up. I just always keep my wrist going back and forth, back and forth. Okay, here's the same thing with some Latin feels. Now, the last page of this booklet is a page on rhythmic notation, if I can find it. You're going to have, again, considerable more time when you're on your own to sit and analyze this, but a few words about it might be appropriate. The little X's are where we're going to be dampening, and the dark notes are where we're going to be playing, actually strumming, hitting, we're going to be pressing down the left hand, I should say. So now, for instance, the first line there we get, let's do it on G7, for instance. Here's, with this little G7 we get, now I'm going to put some accents on 2 and 4, the second and fourth beats. And by the accents, the way I do it is I use the base of my hand and the pick, kind of the butt of my hand. So we get, I kind of strum, I get them at the same time, give this chopping sound. We get that thing. I'm overdoing it now just so you see how it works. The harder you hit, the more accent there is there. There are a few other feels given here, and you can apply all those to this progression, going back to this progression number 1. That all works. They all work in that progression. And here's an example of another one. This is an offshoot of the ones that are in there. Slow it down. So if you understand, if you sit and work on those rhythmic patterns that are given, you'll be able to just almost improvise these things differently every time. And they work out pretty good.
Ted, could you explain to me here on line 5, progression 1, why you used a C major instead of an E minor chord?
Oh, yeah. That's that third substitution principle again. The chords are related a third apart, and you'll notice that E minor 7 is actually an incomplete version of C major 9. Like here. Yeah, you don't have to play it, but you'll see, you could play it if you want, yeah. Yeah, when you hold all those notes together. So they're highly related. So
okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay, we're going to talk about progression 2 now. This one we're going to do in 3/4, in a 3 feel. Here it would be a regular waltz like... That's not what we're after, though. Here's the same kind of thing, but arpeggiated. And so forth. That's one way to treat this. That, again, in the studio, a producer might ask you to give him a lighter feel, a happier feel. That has a little, you know, that's very graceful feeling. Children in the backyard and stuff like that. Here's the jazz waltz feel. That kind of scene. Now, for any of you who don't understand how to play that feel, that's like slow down. Here's another kind of jazz waltz feel. It goes, the thumb goes on each beat. 1, 2, 3, and then you get. It's like the reverse of that quarter note triplet thing we had before. Now we got 3 in the bass versus 2 in the top end. You can do those little those hippity hops in there too. Below this progression, you've got 2 Latin rhythmic notations written out. They're the same ones that are on the other page, but just so you don't have to keep turning back, these 2 feels sound pretty excellent when applied to this progression. I'll just give you a taste of that. You know, it's like, for instance, let's see, let's do this again. That kind of thing. Now, say we do 4 beats on each chord. That's a little slower. I'll stay there for a second so you get that anticipation. Okay. In one of these chords you have, in the D major 9 sharp 11, you've got the George Van Epp's 5th finger principle. It's this chord. George likes to get 2 notes on different frets with 1 finger. So that's a real useful concept. And let's just take that A13 flat 9 in the second line of the progression, use that as an example on visualizing, just to remind you, this chord doesn't have a root in it, but it's very close to this root on the 5th string. So you can see it parked visually on top of that root. And there should be no problem with that. Yeah, as far as fingerings go on these chords, you know, there are all kinds of options, but you just got to experiment and trial and error. Okay, in progression 3 now, we're going to discuss comping chords in the higher strings, or we're going to illustrate it more than discuss it, I should say. These chords are happening up in here. Same progression as before. Now remember, underneath you, something like that's happening underneath you, and you're just doing this over. That comp stuff. Here's the same thing in 3/4, like a. Remember, and the feel would, in the bass end would be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Jazz waltz. So that one's pretty basic. If you just go through it, you should understand it. And in this progression, I used a lot of the double stop concept. That's getting 2 strings with 1 finger. There are a lot of advantages to that technique. Some of them are that you can play up in the higher register more cleanly. Like right here, I'm going like in these chords. When I used to try and play things like that and get them all in accurately, I couldn't move with any security or speed. But once I got the double stop thing, it helped a lot for that. And there are other advantages to it also. A good exercise is to take your E chord down here and just play it with 2 fingers. Then just remove your hand and keep trying to find that spot where you arch your finger up. You don't press it down, you just put it right in between the strings. Then add the major 7. Work until you can put that chord on cleanly, get all 4 notes. And then run the diatonic chord scale of it. If any of you don't know what that means, you've got to be checking out some harmony studies. So they're pretty important. Okay, progression 4, I'm going to play a little of this one. Or maybe I'll just play it all the way through. This is like for a ballad tempo, backing up a singer or something, where you've got to be pretty full. Sounds like this kind of groove here. And all the principles of substitution were discussed before. They're all covered in this thing. That kind of thing. Now that blues thing at the end, I didn't write that in there. I forgot to write that one. There's some, instead of that, we've got some turnarounds, some typical progressions that you use to connect from the end of one section to the beginning of another. Like one of them is based on, it also is just G, where the basic chords are, you know. There's just a G chord written on the top of the last 8 chords, but in a sense I was really thinking then the C minor would have been the next basic chord. You can probably hear it already wanting to go that way. And instead of C minor, I used the companion dominant, the F13 sus. Then the next progression is one of these chromatic things for a second, leading towards a 5. It's all that half step and 5th approach stuff. Like here we go, half step, 5th, half step. So what's written in the brochure is, those are 2 different turnarounds based on all that kind of stuff. So you should have some fun with that. And we're not going to really discuss progression 5. We're just going to skip that. I just want to mention the fact that in this progression there's an X symbol used in some of the chord diagrams. That's just like a passing tone. For instance, here's an A minor 7, 11, and then in the diagram there's an X written here. You just play that after the chord.
Ted, I'd like to ask you a question here. On progression 4, line 3, how is it that you're able to use all these chords in place of the G chord?
That's a very good question. If you were to go back and work backwards from the G chord that's way down farther on the line, that little basic G chord up there, and work backwards, you'll see there's a D7, which is the 5th approach, and then there's another, the A minor is 5th approach, the A7 is the companion dominant of the E minor 7 preceding it, which is also a 5th approach to the A. In other words, E minor 7 would go right to A minor 7. E7 is the companion dominant of the B minor 7, which would lead you towards E. In other words, we're cycling forwards. A lot of this is fifth approach stuff with companion dominants and minors. Like when you see just, if we removed all those minor sevens, we would have D7 preceded by A7 by E, and a half step by F. Now, instead, we've also included those companion minors, so that adds more color. Each dominant was preceded by its companion minor. That's what that's about. And all those chords can be used instead of the G. Progression 6 uses, very similar to progression 4, though, chords on every beat, but it's even more pronounced now. It becomes what I call walking chords as opposed to walking bass. Not only do we have a chord on every beat, but the bass notes are moving around quite a lot. Like here's the bass line right off the top. Now we got a chord on each one of those beats. We got this scene. And the basic progression, of course, is written right up above. Now, ballad time, that's like ballad time. Ballad time can be changed to double time by inserting a bass note in between each chord. If you just insert it and play the chords on the beat, though, it sounds too stiff again, like the other thing did. Like, that's still not really very lively, you know. So what happened, you know? I mean, it's not happening. But if we accent some of the chords a little, then you get that walking effect, and so forth. Now, the time, though, believe it or not, the time on the chords has not changed. We're still going. Let me see if I can show you. Back to, here's ballad time, here's walking. The exact amount of total time for each change has not fluctuated in any way. It's just how are we accenting, and by putting that other note in between, instead of the beat feeling like it's going like that, the ear says now the beat's going twice as fast. So you should have fun with that. This is a pretty long arrangement, and there's a coda, DC, and all that bit, but I tried to think melodically in the top end, so it should be fairly satisfying, I hope. We're going to talk about progression 7 now, and that one has, especially starting towards the middle, I put in a lot of more pianistic type voicings, modern, what we jokingly call urban sounds. Urban blues here. Let's see. I'll just play a little of that. I guess I'll play it all the way through. This is to be played again with a rhythm section laying down the bottom. Don't put any of those bass notes in if you're playing with a bass player. They'll kill you. We'll talk about those fills in a second. We have to talk about that. Starts over right there. The basic progression is just going like it's written right above it. You know, pretty basic, common jazz progression. Where it says fills in the middle of the page, there are a lot of options. If you're working on your, say, single line, right at that point where we got to. You got time? Put some kind of line in there that you're aware of. You could be octave, something. You can do thirds, that's what I did. All those are separate studies. In a way, we could do a whole seminar on each one of those kind of things. You're all pretty much aware of that. Everything is a world unto itself. We're just touching on some things here. Okay, I want to play progression 8 now. Here it goes. Let's see. Remember, the basic progression is going to be very simple. When you go back later and analyze it, it'll be easy to understand. Yeah, you guys are all turning in the right place. A little gospel change in there. Remember I said this was the hardest one, so it takes time to get it. So that's progression 8. I play mainly Fender Telecasters because I found that they give me all kinds of advantages that I can't get out of any other guitar. Nothing else, almost nothing else in mass production comes close for me, although Stratocasters, also Fender guitars, pretty good. One thing is I need the longer scale length. I need the 25.5 scale length because that lets you put, what it is a longer distance from nut to bridge, and consequently you can throw the rhythm pickup farther away from the bridge than you could on a shorter scale neck. I need that because I like to play a solid body, and when you're dealing with a slab of wood, you need all the advantages acoustically you can get. I like to tune the strings down. A solid body responds better to that, and a Telecaster in particular. When I tune the strings lower, they're comfortable, they sit right in your lap, and they balance. I kind of got it even attached to the looks, although I thought they were awful when I first saw them as a kid. They weren't flashy enough, you know, and on and on. There are even more reasons. It's a great instrument. Okay, well, I guess we've come to the end of the program. I want to thank you guys all for coming. I've had a lot of fun. I hope you have too, and hope we'll be able to do a more advanced version of this pretty soon. And what can I say? Thanks a lot. See you later. I love the music of so many people, but especially I would have to single out people like Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, Debussy, all those great classical masters. I'm leaving out many of them, but there's so many great ones. And guitar players, Lenny Breau, what a giant. And my teacher, George Van Epps, just amazing. Ed Bickert, Joe Diorio, and Joe Pass. They're just, I could go, I'm leaving out so many. They're an amazing amount of good musicians on the planet right now. Wes Montgomery, probably one of my very, very favorites. Man never played a wrong note in his life. He might have missed a note, but Mr. Lyrical, you know, I mean, played with such a sense of melody and had such drive. What a great player. All these guys. And piano players, Oscar Peterson, Bill Evans on Tatum, and on, you know, all the great horn players. I mean, there's just so many wonderful musicians, and probably at the top of all of it, just for me, and this may seem a little odd, but my favorite music of all, I would say, is film music. That touches me the most, moves me the most, and probably my favorite composer of all that stuff is a man named Max Steiner.